When people first hear about the job, there is a bit of surprise because it's a hidden task and not many people have cause to think about it ever. The idea that someone might die without anyone. But it's then followed quickly on by a light bulb moment. Of course, such situations must arise. Life really can happen, and it does. So, what I tend to do is whip you through the many tricks and traps that lead people to my desk, tell you what I do once they get there, and impart some of the lessons learned. So, the first umbrella group, and whilst everyone's different, it's kind of crystallized over the years since 2017 when I started into umbrella groups of people. The first one is estranged. So there's two types of estranged. The first one is involuntary, which sounds like it doesn't make sense, but it happens, and it happens more often than you would think. It has levels. There is the kind of bland estrangement of people who just didn't keep in touch much. And when you had COVID or a couple of Christmases where they didn't see each other, and if they went to the partner's house for Christmas, the two either side of that, they haven't seen each other for up to 5 years. And it's not necessarily a problem, but it's just a lack of connection. It's usually siblings because they are assumed to be natural friends, but actually they can be very different. And once they leave the family home, they don't speak much, no malice. And whenever I have to phone someone to break the news of a death, everyone does react differently. But with this type of estrangement, it's usually silence for a moment because they don't know how to feel. It's a very confusing thing. This is why I have a problem with the proliferation of the term loved one in the funeral world, and never say sorry for your loss because it assumes a connection that may make them feel bad for not having, or for not having as well as everyone else. So I always stick to sorry to be the one to tell you, because I am. I'm always sorry to be the one to constantly tell people someone has died. I always also add when people feel guilty in those scenarios for not having the solid family connection they feel they should have done. I always tell them, our biological family are given to us in the same way as married at first sight contestants. So there really is no shame if it doesn't work. It's a miracle if it does. And then with involuntary, there's the mid level, which is relationships that have halted and have fallen down a bit, but there is no resentment. A good example of that was I had to phone a 16-year divorcee of the deceased as part of my routine inquiries. And I never assume anything, like I just said, but part of me was kind of relieved. That's a long time. Hopefully it'll be an okay call. But when I did phone, they said that they had visited the person every day in hospital when they got ill and fallen in love again and realized it was a mistake. And then she died. So, you get these terrible mid-level estrangements where they didn't hate each other, they've fallen apart from each other. And then you can have these real regrets and these real time lost situations. Similarly, there was someone who I dealt with who had a personality changing brain injury. So it wasn't that the people fell out, it was that the person changed so violently that they couldn't maintain the relationship they had before that injury. And so the family left one by one. The partner went first, then the daughter, then the son. But they left him a dog so that he'd have someone to love. They really loved him, but they couldn't live with him anymore. And that sort of leads and segues nicely into the top end of involuntary, which is just life being horrible. It can just do that to you. It can just pull the rug. Dementia, making husbands forget their wives, so they can't do the funeral. They don't even know they had a wife. And then mental health challenges, particularly hard. I had someone who drove into my district and died in the car park because he was on the run from voices that were in his head that he had ascribed to being in the walls of his house. And I tracked down his sister, who hadn't seen him for 7 years, not because she didn't love him, she loved him dearly, but she couldn't have that relationship with him. It was too slippery. His mental health just meant he couldn't reciprocate. So that is what causes involuntary estrangement, where I'm kind of finding people who are there to be found, but it's more difficult because they're not in the immediate phone book or in the immediate house when I search it. But there is, of course, very much the voluntary category, the one your brain went to when I first said estrangement. You walk out that door, you never come back. And that's pretty much the main type I get with estrangement. The coroner's line is usually, 2 children, not spoken for 20 years. And in those cases, when I phone up, they either hang up on me immediately, or they're on it. They're talking to me. They want to come. They have to come. And whether that's because there's massive regret for the relationship that's fallen apart, or more typically in this situation, massive issues that need to be settled by going to a ritual, a funeral, and seeing that person gone. The best example of this is someone I found his daughter on a Facebook group where she was talking about his surname because he had an unusual surname. And basically, when he was referred to me, I phoned housing because he was in our housing stock to get the key. And it wasn't that they were relieved he was dead. They were just relieved I wasn't phoning about yet another incident. He'd been moved about 4 or 5 times to different housing in different towns because every time he settled somewhere, he would be banned from all of the shops almost immediately. When I found the one taxi driver in the district who would take him, he said that it was because he was constantly this ball of anger. And if anyone came near him, he'd hit them with his walking stick. And so by the time he came to me, he had just started being banned from those shops too, where he'd been settled, and the taxi driver was having to take him out of district. And when I got his daughter on the phone, straight away, it all falls out. If someone wants to get something off their chest, I'm a neutral party who's just told them the worst news. So it comes straight out like a therapy session. Told me all about the child abuse she'd suffered at his hands, but then the child abuse he'd suffered at his mother's hands. And it made a lot of sense. And those kind of cases where someone has had that kind of impact on someone in their youth, it reminds me of this book written by Pope Lonergan called I'll Die After Bingo, which is about his job in a care home, where he has these old men who can barely push themselves out of a chair, but he knows in their heyday they were really quite hard men. They were, proper domestic abusers, and now they're at their weakest. And he always says, it's not for me to judge a sad, frail old man. That's family stuff. And I'm the same. I can hear about all this terrible stuff, but that's for them to process. I'm the neutral party who takes this neutral bit of legislation and makes things not better, but just ends them physically, does the job of putting a line under them, which is quite the privilege that you find, because you do see people finding quite a lot of peace in these services. Similarly, a good example from that Pope Lonergan quote, I was sent a man who was the favourite of the care home, and he cuddled a teddy bear wherever he went and had pink heart-shaped sunglasses. But when I found his daughter, he was indeed a terrifying man in his heyday. So that's why I also find it interesting, my job. You realise when you're trying to write a eulogy that you're writing a eulogy for about 15 different people. They've been a different person at so many different points of their lives, and it's really hard to sum people up. And I think it's really helped me in life to see a lot more grey area, and it sort of opens your eyes quite a lot. So the second category is outlived. And you have the classic lived to 100 winner, sort of. Like the lady from the book, Jean, who her important people to me list at the care home had crosses through everyone because they'd all gone before her. Sometimes people just beat everyone out and it's just them left standing. And she was so great. She wrote poems about losing her knickers, which we read at the funeral and I published in the book because it was her wish to be published. So I wanted to make it happen. And she wrote a really funny poem about her friend with dementia who kept imaginary chickens. And by rights, she should have had that full chapel with, loads of people mourning her that we all associate with a life well lived. Wrongly, because as we can see from her, it's not possible always to have everyone there to say goodbye to us, and therefore it's not a scorecard. It is literally just where the music stops. Like I mentioned the dementia earlier, a lady there who spent her whole life in the NHS working with loads of people and helping, and had a husband who she loved. And it just all fell apart because he couldn't remember her and he couldn't do her funeral rites for her. There was a lady I did a funeral for who died alone on the bathroom floor, which is the archetypal lonely death that everyone always talks about in the worst possible terms. But she had the 2.4 children and a husband. They'd all gone before her. So it's not something you can plan for. You can't plan for a deathbed crowd. You can't plan for people crying at your funeral. It's a random universe. There's no such thing as a natural order. So it's kind of why part of the reason I wrote about it is to stop people looking at my people through the prism of their own 3 a.m. fears, and realizing that it could be you, not in a bad way, but in a good way, in a kind of, if it could be anyone, relax. It's not a moral judgment. It's not a failure. If it happens, it happens. And if it happens, you'll be supported. Someone will be able to look after you. We need to stop using the phrase "you're going to die alone" as though it's, the ultimate insult. It's happenstance. It really is, and we only hurt ourselves when we use that, because we know deep down it could be us. And basically, fear of death is a kind of fear of life, which I thought I'd invented when I first improvised it during a talk, but I believe Mark Twain said it first, so it must be correct. Which is basically to say, don't worry about death. Don't let it cast the shadow over your life that makes you do all the things that stay on the tram lines to make sure you don't die on your own. Just live for now, because it's really all you have. So, third category, solitary. Again, there are two types here. Involuntary solitary, which is delightful to say, which is obviously where people have been pushed into solitude against their will. You'll get different shades of this. I went into a house once where the windows and doors were just covered with foliage. It was like a cocoon of sort of like Sleeping Beauty standards. And next to his bedside, this man had the order of service for his wife's funeral in the 1990s. So he was obviously held there in space and time, with the memory of her. Hopefully a good memory. I hope he wasn't just plain sad, because there was a note from her on the fridge from when she was alive saying, "I'm right here, love you." It was quite sort of strangely beautiful. And he'd obviously been pushed into that solitude, and it hadn't been what he'd wanted, and he was, living in some degree of sadness. But then I walked into another house of a man who, from the people I spoke to about him, I knew that his wife was his life, and her death had been really hard for him. But he'd pushed all of the furniture in the whole house up against the walls and made giant model railway layouts everywhere, which I don't think she would have let him do, possibly. So he was leaning into it. He was enjoying his own space. He was going to groups for trains and model trains. So that's how we found people to come to him. And he was out every day at cafes locally. So he was known. The chip shop was shut in his honor. I always say that when people go, "How tragic," about my job. Have you ever had a chip shop close for you? No, be quiet. So there's involuntary solitary, but there's also very much the voluntary, where there's a very common line in my coroner referral emails. They kept themselves to themselves. And there are just some people who die as they live. And I was having this conversation with a family the other day when I was handing over the keys. This gentleman had clearly been laying for at least 6 months, at least. And they were very upset about that. They were guilty about it. But as we talked and had a coffee, they were talking about how he didn't ever want visitors. He didn't ever want to visit with them. He was very private. He was very quiet. And when I sort of tabled it as, well, do you not think that's fine then? He died as he lived. It really took the weight off their shoulders. They said, that's a good way of thinking about it. He didn't think it would have been tragic for him to be on his own. On his own was absolute peak for him. And equally, in the book, there's a chapter about a lovely guy called Carl, who was an award-winning gardener, which is how I found his tribe. But he was a bit of a mystery. Everyone I met and spoke to, because when in this job, when you find someone, you think, brilliant, I've solved it. But with him, whenever I found someone and asked them a question about him, they go, "I don't know. He never really spoke." So he went about his life in silence. Eventually, I found his first and only ever girlfriend, who said, well, his family were all deaf and nonverbal. So he grew up, despite being, hearing and speaking, he grew up in silence and preferred it. And so he was comfortable with silence. It was his preferred thing. And therefore, he just went about his life quietly and liked to be by himself. And he sat out bowel cancer in his house. And I think, and so did she, we were having a chat about it, that he would have hated to go to hospital. And he would have hated health visitors in his house. So again, possibly not a tragic end, possibly the end that he would have approved of. And as I say, died as he lived. Now, there's another category here, which is kind of related to solitary, but it's out on its own a bit. Outcast. These are the kind of people who are solitary, but for reasons, whether that's unjustified, so they've been rejected by family for drug addiction or being trans or being gay, or there's justifiable ones like sexual offences, particularly around children. Again, it's a perfect case in point about remaining neutral. I was referred someone who had a record for child sexual offences and whose sister did not want to do his funeral and whose brother did not want to do it either. They did not want anything further to do with him. In fact, when I said to them I would be scattering him unwitnessed at the crematorium, they said, please don't. We don't want him wafting, because they lived nearby. So they were really, really estranged. But this guy, he had his cat's ashes in his house with a photo on top. And I just thought, I don't know what's happened to him, but it's over now. And he obviously loved his cat, so popped the cat in with him in the way I would have done for anyone, because this is a neutral act that we have to carry out for everyone. And it's the reason why, when I once had a funeral that attracted a lot of media attention, because the person was, and it's the next category coming up, unidentified, when they reported incorrectly in one newspaper that the community had crowdfunded this funeral, I made sure to correct that, not just because the council deserves its props for doing the work, but also that's not very comforting. Again, it comes back to that feeling of we'd have to be worth something for everyone to want to crowdfund us. And there are going to be people who feel like, well, I wouldn't get that treatment. I would go unremarked. So it's nice to know and important to know that there is a neutral service that will take care of you, even if you've done something outrageous, terrible, made an awful mistake, you'll be held. Now, as I've already hinted, the next category is the unclaimable. So the unidentified. I've had one unidentified person in my time, a lady who was found by the beach and who to this day does not have a name, but she had 115 people at her funeral because no one wants to be forgotten or alone. So that fellow feeling comes out, and the universality of that feeling brings people to that person's grave. We just don't want to go alone, so we won't allow anyone else to go alone, which is another lovely thing I've learned through this job. And I've also had one set of 100-year-old bones that were found in a garage, which was very odd. But that's what the act is for. It's for when 100-year-old bones are just sitting in a garage and then get sent to an auction house and no one knows what to do. So they phone me, and I have on my day off to drive to the crematorium and pick up a mini coffin with some bones in there and some ritualistic accoutrements. So I think they came from a Masonic lodge. But that person's now buried. And there's other people in this sort of unclaimable category, the displaced. So I had an asylum seeker who died far from home. His family couldn't come and get him. He couldn't be taken back. So we, on their behalf, buried him. And the lost, the street homeless, for those who have just not got anyone to be found or who would be found. They've just cut their connections so much. I've not dealt with the street homeless. My predecessor did. And he said that the service was held in the graveyard and the street drinkers all came out and poured a drink on his coffin. And he was worried that the brother who was there would be offended. But the brother said, no, that's brilliant. That is a good ritual. That's fitting. And that's what I see a lot of at my funerals. The gardener from earlier, his own flowers were brought and bunched and put for his coffin spray. So whilst it's not a regular funeral, a council funeral, we can fill in that gap of like ordinary grief or family grief with something just as good, or, you know, attempting to make something ritualistic and special. And the final category, and the biggest at the moment and ever growing, is no money. It's the most general. It can happen to anyone. Most of the above can happen to anyone, but this one really can, and it's the most universal. In 2024, there was a study done, a bit of research that said 1 in 5 people in the UK struggle to fund a funeral. Of those 1 in 5, 11% came to the council or the other alternative, which is the Department for Work and Pensions payment, which is very narrowly applied. You have to all be on benefits, and it doesn't cover the cost of a full funeral. And it's not me being funny. They say that on their own website. The lowest amount that a funeral director has seen paid is £50. The highest is 1,900, which I think we all know doesn't really touch the sides, just about gets you a direct cremation. And the rest of those people, the sort of 90-ish%, are kicking funeral poverty into household poverty, and out of view. So funeral poverty is bigger than we know. It's the working poor, the middle class, the lower middle class, for whom £4,000 is like the boiler going twice in one day. How are you going to do it? I've done a case this year where she had had 3 family deaths, and she just couldn't do the third one. The third one had tapped her out. So it's too expensive, and it's putting people in financial distress that currently is being hidden by selling things, taking out loans, installment plans. But as the prices just keep going up and people have more deaths in the family and can't extend that credit, a creaking council system is going to be called upon a lot more. I've had 18 cases this year. I usually have 12. It's not a massive increase, but it's notable. And the city and borough councils with denser populations will probably be able to tell a bigger story. And the BBC in July reported that councils are doing 12 funerals a day. So ultimately, it's either going to have to be fund councils, or the government should really do something about bringing it back to cradle to grave. So it really is cradle to grave. And my suggestion for that would be, I have a contract with a funeral director because I buy in bulk, to put it bluntly. The government, with their buying power, could create a municipal rate to run alongside the private sector that could be affordable, so that people have that option for themselves. I get it half price. The government can get it for a quarter of the price. Something has to be done from their side, because we can't have this important ritual that people need. And they must do, because they've done it ever since before language. I was in a burial chamber, a Neolithic burial chamber in January, and they carved the walls so that when you walked through with lamps, the figures would dance on the walls. Even then, people knew we have to do a thing. So to hold that to expensive ransom just seems bizarre to me, and it seems like something the government should put back into the provision, because it used to be there. There was a grant right up until 1986, I believe. So that's what puts people on my desk. What happens when they get there? Well, no money cases usually come with family, and unidentified cases come with no hope of clues, no name, no bank account. So I will take a typical person who died at home and got referred by the coroner due to no apparent kin. That's the best way to show you the through line of my job. It all starts with a house search, which takes ages to get going because the police property store have changed their system, which means getting keys has become quite a saga. But I won't talk to you about that because we don't have all night. But once I do get the keys from the police, we go into the house, and this is 3-pronged, the reason for this. There's the public health aspect. The Act is under the Public Health Act. So we're not just interested in the public health problem of a body not being dealt with, but also scraps of their last meal, their fruit bowl, the perishable stuff in the fridge and freezer. Even that won't last forever if the house sits there for a year or two, when people are trying to work out who the next of kin is. So we empty the fridge, empty the freezer, turn them off at the wall, take all the perishable food, put it in the bin, and take the bin out for curbside, and do a sort of little cleaning lady job for them, because who else is going to do it? When people say that's not your job, because sometimes they do, and because it's not in the Act, I always just say, well, whose job is it? There's literally no one else there. And with the second prong, we're kind of looking for admin. So the basic admin, bank statement, because we do have to legally try and recoup our costs. And also, it's just useful to know who we're informing for freezing things. We just need to tell people that this person has died. So gas, electric, all of those bits and pieces, which are rarely there. So that's quite frustrating. But also the bigger admin as well, because there's a subsection of Section 46 that says, I will not cremate where I have reason to believe burial would be preferred. And that could be any reason. It could be religion. It could be a will. It could be a funeral plan. It could be a spoken wish. I had someone once who had literally just said to their family, please don't let them burn me. That's good enough for me. That's a wish. But I need to know. I need it to be there or to be said to me. Otherwise, it might as well not exist. So we're looking for a will. Very rare. 60% of people don't have one. A funeral plan. Evidence of preferred or required disposition can also be if they have their parents' death certificates and what they did. So if they cremated their parent or cremated their spouse, I can follow suit, and also maybe even find where that person was scattered. I've done that before, so I can then scatter them with that person or in the same coordinates in the crematorium. I'm also in there looking for their people. So I'm looking for kin, legal or, anything, just friends, their partner, whether married or unmarried. And to do this, I'm looking for the holy grail of an address book, very rare. Last numbers dialed, phone messages on the house phone, numbers on scraps of paper can sometimes solve a case. Talking to neighbours, we always knock for the neighbours just in case they think we're breaking in as well. We have to make sure they know what we're doing. And evidence of the person as well, not just their people, to get the person to either take the funeral back from us or to attend, but the person themselves. If there's no one to tell us, we need to get the evidence from the home. So what are their hobbies? Well, the railways, the gardening. What music are they listening to? What book are they reading? What stuff is around the house that speaks about them? Sometimes you can also see items for the coffin top, like there was a lovely metal nameplate from the lady's desk at the job she'd really been proud of. So that went straight on the coffin, And I also want a complete death certificate because I have to register the person as well. So I want middle name, marital status, job while living. And this is all tricky to get. I mean, a passport will give me middle name and place of birth, and a birth certificate maybe. But this stuff is usually found by speaking to people. Place of birth is very much something they might have said to someone in passing, but I have to be sure. And marital status, that's slippery sometimes if they keep themselves to themselves. But married for a week, but no one was allowed to speak of it. That was my favourite response to marital status when I asked a carer. And occupation while living, that also needs to come from people that knew them, or clues in the house. If you can find, once I found someone's CV with a personal statement. I mean, that's amazing. But if I find nobody at all, we may nowadays set tracing services to work, in particular because I don't know if you heard the government's bona vacantia list, which is empty estates, where they put all the estates that aren't claimed, has had to be taken down because there's been a large-scale fraud where people have been forging wills and saying, I'm the long lost. So now we can't trust anything. We have to ask real tracing services to look for those actual kin and make sure that we get the estate right to the right legal person. They won't always find the right person who knew them. For instance, it's usually a third cousin who gets the estate, but I find the friends in the phone. And the friends aren't going to legally get the estate, but they can tell me the stuff and come to the funeral, and there's a connection there. So between us, we get the whole picture. Sometimes the family take the arrangements off us. Sometimes they won't. They're just like, no, absolutely not. We didn't want anything to do with them. Sometimes they can't, but they want to come. So we arrange for them to attend because we think it's important for there to be a funeral. Not every council has a funeral because the Act just says burial or cremation. It doesn't legally require a funeral. But for us, funeral is interchangeable with burial and cremation. So yeah, after registering the death, I also do the very boring, dry stuff, raise the purchase order, pay the funeral director, arrange the funeral, as in the paperwork, raise invoices against the estate, battle with banks for weeks. So it's from the existential to the admin of the book title, really. This job runs the full gamut. And finally, just to, so we've got plenty of time for questions, I'll wrap up. The lessons that I've learned from this job, and I need other people to know because, my goodness, it's so important how chaotic things can become if you don't go prepared. The things I need to freeze estates, to find people, to learn what funeral method I should use. These are things that kin need as well, because it's not always a conversation you've had. And people don't always know the extent of your admin. They don't know that you've got Netflix or HelloFresh, in there. So I need everyone to start planning for when they're not in the room and know what it is that people need to know. So who are we cancelling things with, informing? For this, I've got a book in my kitchen cupboard on top of my will, my V5, my power of attorney, my birth certificate, all of my paperwork. I've got a book on top of that. And when you open it, it says, if you're reading this, I am dead, which is very dramatic, which is so much fun. And it's basically, you don't have to leak your passwords or even your account numbers. It's just basically a list I bank with, I save with, I have pensions with, I have phone with, I have internet with, so that someone can just sit down with it on a desk and just phone all these people in one afternoon and freeze it. Because all they're going to need is your details and then latterly a death certificate. So that would take hours out of it and would stop people having to keep informing of death. And because these phone lines are not very well set up for death. I've got a lot of bad min stories that I won't go into here because we'll be here all day, but there are some very bad ways of trying to inform companies. They're not set up for it. So it's quite traumatic as well. So taking the trauma out of that by having that list of things is so valuable. And a will, not just for estate handover. I've learned through bitter experience this year that your executor is the person who can claim you. But if you're intestate, the rules of intestacy comes in, and it means that the people who can claim your body and your funeral rights go spouse, child, parent, sibling, and on. And now you try telling a parent they can't claim their body. I've had to do that twice this year. It's not much fun. So if you're still married and you haven't divorced yet, your ex, spoon to be ex, can claim you. You know, it's a horror story waiting to happen. If you haven't got that executor as the person who can claim you, if you're unmarried and your parents hate your spouse, they might, well, you're not a legal spouse. They might not invite them to your funeral. So I've learned through this that a will isn't just about money. It's about who is taking care of you, who owns you and can carry out your wishes. So it has to be someone you trust. In your list as well, phone numbers, who are we ringing? Because for the next of kin, really, for the coroner, are the only sort of thing in town. They're not interested in best friend. They're not interested in unmarried partner, even though they might be the closest to you. So for those key contacts that people would need to phone, and just everything we need to know that would just evaporate on your death. My car is parked in a garage block away from my flat. So I've written third one on the right facing the street because I've walked around for hours with central locking keys, looking for people's cars, just anything you can think of, anything we need, then put it all in that drawer or kitchen cupboard of death and get on with the main bit, living your life. I'll stop talking now so we can actually have some questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for this run through, for sharing your experiences. I'm sure that those of you who have actually read the book could relate to the stories mentioned, others not, obviously, but it was a very insightful sort of walkthrough about most of your experience. I don't know. There are no questions posted on the chat, but I don't know if there are any questions from directly from the participants today. Let me just check with regards to any waved hand or.
Put my email in the chat in case anyone has
Thank you
anything.
very much. Thank
Because
you.
sometimes there's nothing in the moment, is there? But
Yes, yes, it does happen. Okay, we have the
Hi.
ah,
hi.
Nicoletta.
Hi, I do have a question. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much. It was so interesting. And
Oh, thank you.
actually, even learning about the different groups of people who might actually fall under your remit was very, very enlightening. It's very interesting and it's amazing what you do. And so thank you.
Yeah.
I also have a question because I was thinking back about the human remains that she said. Wouldn't that fall under the remit of the Human Tissue Authority as well?
I got in touch with them, but I think because of the age of them, because they were over 100 years old, they were like,
Yeah.
they're now archaeological.
Yeah.
It was odd because I thought to myself, my nan would have been 100 this year. Like, there could still be a child or a grandchild walking the earth. But yeah, the police didn't want to scrape them, are we still recording? I'll tell you the story of this offline one day. Email me because I can't make this public. It's so embarrassing for, yeah, the people that refer.
Okay.
But yeah.
How So my follow-up question for context, I'm a lecturer at the Brighton and Sussex Medical School
Oh, cool.
um, in anatomy. So we deal a lot with the HTA and all of that. And there is always a question around osteological remains and all the ethics around them, because especially those who were donated to med schools
Yeah.
more than 100 years ago, or even more recently, but we don't know the history of those remains really. So I wonder, in that case, of your specific case, how would they establish that the bones were actually older? than 100 years.
Yeah, the police hadn't scraped them and they hadn't sent them to a lab, but the lab did a visual assessment based on the teeth and certain
Mm,
things, the health, the dental health of the person and the sort of coloration. But they didn't do a formal investigation of them. And there seemed to be this idea that because they were old, it's like, and it was a bit of a shame really, because I think more should have been done. But I spent a month pushing, and no one was interested in doing any more. I ran it past Sue Black as well. I sent her the photos to sort of say,
amazing.
yeah, do you agree? And she was like, yeah, definitely old, old. So we just had to give them a little funeral, talk about the sort of universal thing of like, hi, you're one of us. We're here in case the people you loved would have liked someone to say something. Yeah, it's a shame, but it was all
Yeah,
visual assessment. There was no real investigation.
yeah.
So if you want to
Thank you
get
so
away with
much.
murder, leave it in a garage in a box, a funny little box, and they'll drop it off of me.
Amazing. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicoletta. We have Penny.
Hi.
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 Yes, a question. As you'll know, Evie, the Law Commission is starting a consultation in early 2026
Yes.
about disposal of um, uh, disposal, I can't remember the phrase, but sort of
Yeah.
disposal of remains, who owns the
The
body,
duty.
and
Yeah.
also why is there a postcode lottery for public health funerals and should something be done about it?
Yes, and it
How do you,
should.
I mean, like you, I assume like you, I'm lined up to try and talk to them before they write the consultation
Yes, I've
document
emailed them
rather
and
than
they've got me on
after.
file. Yeah.
Same here. And I'll explain who I am in a minute.
Ah,
But what do you hope to get out of that?
I
And
just
what do you think is achievable?
Section 46 hasn't been updated, since the 80s. Well, it hasn't been updated at all. It came out in 84, didn't it? So it's old and it needs a tweak to word it as funeral, not disposal. Because it was written before the grant was taken away and when roughly things were keeping pace inflation wise, wages and life, but it's not fit anymore because we're mopping up a social crisis. We shouldn't be dealing with families. We shouldn't ever come by a family. We should be for people who've been found dead, literally, in our area. So with nobody to enact. And the social aspect is uncomfortable, having to come to the environmental health department because your dad's died. He's now an environmental health issue, except he's not, because there are people aware of his death. And it isn't going to become a problem, the body, it's just the money. So I want them to change the wording of Section 46 to make it funeral, not disposal. I want them to broaden the DWP provision or scrap it and give money to councils. And so we can deal with everyone or properly, or they need to do that big scale thing themselves of trying to tackle funeral poverty by getting funerals back into the welfare state provision or somewhere near it, a cheaper version. But at minimum, we need to review Section 46 because that's the reason for the postcode lottery. In some districts, you'll get a funeral, in some, you will not. And that's because the law allows it.
Thank you. Thank you, Penny. Are there any other questions or maybe some thoughts for reflections? Rosalie?
Hi, Evie.
Hi.
I'm interested, also ASDS council member, so really delighted to be here. And as I said, I'm really interested and intrigued by the ritual part of what you do, and loved about your book how you take the little nuggets that you find in people's homes and what they leave behind to create something truly personal. And you gave a few wonderful examples just now as well. I'm just wondering if are those services usually taking place at the crematorium, or if you find out they had a particular religion, would you then go into a church or a mosque, or also ask like a faith leader to do it? How does that that side of the works
Yeah.
for you?
If I find out there's a religious need, I will bring in someone from the community from that religion. And we had a Buddhist funeral recently, which took place at the crematorium, but had the Buddhist rituals. So we gave him apples for his onward journey and read all the proper readings and wore the proper colours. But if, like, recently there was a lady who went to a church in our local area. So I approached that church and they very generously gave the place for free, the priest for free. So we could have it in a more fitting environment of her own church. If it's a burial because of religious need, we'll do it burial at the graveside. So that we had the Catholic priest come for the asylum seeker because his country of origin was Catholic, principally, and his children said that would be what he wanted. So we'll bring in anyone we can get who can give the correct rites, and we'll try and go to the correct place if there is a correct place. With Buddhism, I think we were okay to do it at the crematorium because we didn't have any local places that would have worked for that. But I've been given, quite a few people have given me constant sort of ongoing access to them. So I've got a rabbi who will always help me, and priests who always say, call me. So we try and do that where we can.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's really beautiful how you not only do that with so much dignity, but also with just genuine interest into those people.
Yeah, I don't know how you can't have interest in people.
No, me neither. But I mean, yeah, it's always very inspirational to listen to you, and also talking about will, and I think how we can prepare for our death.
That's my second book.
I know. So,
out in June.
Oh yeah, another one for a checklist. So thanks a lot.
Yes, I'll put it in the in the comments. Get ahead of being dead. June 26th. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalie. I think Rosalie mentioned a word which is dignity, which I think comes out throughout. It comes very naturally, the element of dignity and the element of compassion, which is very much underrated in our society today, in anyone's society, I think, wherever you are
on
right
the ground.
now. Sadly enough, yes. But yes, I think these are two words which, at least for me, stand out very much when going through your experiences. I don't know if you have any other questions or comments from anyone.
From me again, I suppose, as a follow-up on the points you made, because I agree with everything that has been said as well. Is there any work that has been done or is going to be done with charities or even with, I don't know, schools or universities to get the word out? Because maybe people don't really understand or even realize that there are people who actually die without anyone looking after them.
No, the most awareness I'm aware of is my own book, but that's very niche, obviously. I work a bit with Quaker Social Action. They're a charity who deal with funeral poverty. We're going to do a joint event next year. So to try and, because the trouble is people often say we don't want to advertise this, which is not advertising because it's the last resort. It's the point of last resort, and so it goes under the radar in that respect. But my book and what I'm trying to work out with Quaker Social Action is the most so far. But yeah, it's quite unknown still. There's a lot to do to shine a light on it. No one wants to talk about dying alone. It's like the bummer of dying alone.
Yeah.
Don't talk to me about
stigma.
But then realizing it's not a stigma is a big deal. It lightens the load.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, Penny.
Yeah, I just, in reply as much to the other questions as everything else, I thought it might be sensible to say I'm a trustee of a charity called Aging Without Children
Of course
in the
you are.
UK.
I know you.
Yeah. And what I've been working on this year and still haven't got to the end of is how do you, I mean, and I'm kind of slightly flying blind because I don't know what's in Evie's second book. But meanwhile, we've been putting together material
Yes.
for a webinar and last year we did a webinar on planning for later life without someone you trust, which is all the stuff. So much advanced care planning
Yeah.
is first find someone you trust and have a
Yeah.
conversation with them. And
First hurdle.
if you go, I haven't got one of those, it's silent. So we're the sort of, we're trying to fill in the gaps when people go, I haven't got one of those. And we produced a webinar and it's up on YouTube and,
Oh,
all sorts
brilliant.
of personal opinions that lots of people would disagree with and so on. But nevertheless,
So
it's
important.
relatively easy because the underlying legislation is the Mental Capacity Act. And it's one bit of legislation and it's only 20 years old.
Yeah.
By comparison, so, we stopped at death basically with that one. And so the new one, which I'm still trying to produce the jigsaw for, is called After Death Without Someone You Trust. And
Yes.
it's much harder to put together because, I'm still chasing down contacts. I had a really useful conversation recently with an air hunter who I know they don't like being called air hunters, but
Yeah. But that's what.
That Evie put me in contact with. And one useful piece of information, I mean, for example, the guidance on public health funerals talks about it being good practice to try and locate next of kin, but it doesn't say you have to.
Nope.
But it doesn't even say it's good practice to see if there's a will.
Mm.
There's a motivation to kind of see if there's any money, but actually, if you're an individual who hasn't got family, and many of our members, they haven't got a family member in the world.
Yeah.
They were only children of only children, that sort of thing. And I know one lady in that situation, she has written her funeral wishes down to writing her own eulogy,
Yeah.
but she has no guarantee, there's
Will
nowhere
that be enacted?
what, will it be
Mm.
enacted? Will it be found? She's got the money to pay for it, but will
Yeah.
the money be found early enough? Or will actually she'll have been popped off to the crematorium by one of Evie's colleagues in a less enlightened bit of the country before anyone finds her eulogy and her favourite hymns, let alone the fact that she wanted to leave her money to the cats and dogs home.
Yeah.
Um, so we're trying to fill in the gaps. And so at the moment, I'm pulling together a sort of progress update on the basis that it's getting embarrassing how long it's taking. But after death without someone you trust, I mean,
Quagmire.
it's the information, it's where we've done briefings on it, it's things like there's the people who are very worried that the unmarried partner or the stepchildren won't get anything if they die intestate. And there are others whose eyes light up when they discover that the stepchildren won't get anything.
It's a very personal thing.
But at a practical level,
Yeah.
one thing that's really, really difficult is that, yeah, write a will. Who the expletive deleted do you get to be your executor?
Yeah.
It's not easy. It's not obvious. Um, it's
Yeah.
yes, you can get a solicitor to do it. Um, Probate complaints are one of the highest sets of complaints against solicitors. And also, some solicitors are incredibly expensive. And if you haven't got anyone to oversee how they manage your estate, and
Yep.
also, where do you record that solicitor X is the one that's got your will and is your executor? There is, it's not like
Yeah.
lasting power of attorney, where it's relatively straightforward. If you know my name and date of birth, you can contact the Office of the Public Guardian and they'll go, yeah, she's got a lasting power of attorney and her attorney is Fred Bloggs. There is no real equivalent to that for
Mm.
wills and executors. And,
Yep.
still tracing down rabbit holes.
It's a quagmire.
Yeah, it is a quagmire, totally. Yeah, and people want to do the right thing. They want to plan
Yeah.
for their death. And it's not easy. I mean, there's also the fascinating quirks, like whereas if you appoint someone as your lasting power of attorney, they have to sign in triplicate. that they're willing to do it. Well, maybe not in triplicate, but they have to sign that they're willing to do it, and then the power of attorney can be registered. Um, if, on the other hand, you want to appoint someone as your executor, you don't have to tell them. It's just that after you're dead, they can say, no, I don't want to do it.
Yes, they can absent themselves, can't they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And similarly, even if you appoint the public trustee as your executor, who's a government department that I think it really is esoteric to have heard of, basically they say, if possible, please can you let us know that you've done that? And then after you're dead, we'll work out if we're willing to do it. I mean, they
Yeah.
say that on their website.
That's
I
another
mean,
niche category, people who've come to me because the executors said no thank you and walked away. So
yeah,
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 abandoned at the funeral home.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there are more and more of us. And it's it's kind of it's not people who necessarily who are unwilling to plan. And it's kind of, for want of a better phrase, and I'm sure there's a better way of phrases it, it's increasing numbers of people who aren't on the fringes of society.
No,
They
no.
just haven't got family, because lots of us don't have family anymore. And if we get beyond a certain age, our friends tend to be the same generation as us and get frail and can't help or are dead. Anyway,
Yeah,
all good fun.
agree. All
Thank
right,
you.
we're bang on. Bang on 5.
Thank you, Penny. So, um, it's just 6 o'clock here in Malta,
Ah,
which means 5 o'clock in the UK. We're yeah, we're an hour further. So I thank you very, very much for today, for your insights, for sharing your stories, for sharing the stories of others, and also it's it. I think your book, what you said today, is also very much a reminder that um, uh, I quote your book now: "Everyone has a story, and we're all temps here." Um, it's as you write, but it's something I really agree with in terms of your stories, but in terms of living life in general. The book technically speaks about that, but it actually speaks about life, and it's a very harsh reminder of reminding us that how to live our life as best as we can in the best of our conditions and depending on obviously our situations. So thank you very much for tonight. Thank you to all the participants for
thank
joining
you.
us. And a reminder to fill in the feedback form, please. We would really appreciate your input, and we will be in touch shortly with the events for 2026. All the best. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank